The old Zephyrian sat in the corner booth of the space station cantina, his 4 purple eyes staring at nothing. Commander Kethver had been many things in his long life. A warrior, a leader, a hero to his people. Now he was just a broken old soldier trying to forget a war that ended 3 years ago. The cantina was dark and smoky. Alien music played softly in the background. Different species sat at tables, drinking and talking. Nobody paid attention to the old Zephyrian in the corner. That was how he liked it. He came here every day at the same time. He ordered the same drink. He sat in the same booth. He tried not to remember, but today was different. A young female walked into the cantina and looked around. She had the confidence of someone used to getting what she wanted. Her name was Nexia Prime, and she was a war reporter for the Galactic News Network. She had traveled across 3 star systems to find him.nex. I spotted Kethver immediately. He was hard to miss. Zephyrians were tall and thin, with gray skin and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on their faces. This one looked older than most, with deep lines around his eyes and scars on his arms. She walked over to his table. "Commander Kethvar?" she asked politely. The old alien looked up at her. His eyes were tired. "I am no longer a commander. I am retired." "May I sit down?" Kethvar studied her for a moment. He had been expecting this day to come. Someone would eventually want to hear his story. He nodded toward the empty chair across from him. Nexia sat down and placed a small recording device on the table. "I am Nexia Prime from Galactic News Network. I would like to ask you about the war with the humans." "Why?" "Because nobody has heard the real story. The Zephyrian government says the war ended because human space was not worth conquering. They say it was too expensive, but I think there is more to it." Kethver picked up his drink and took a sip. It was strong alcohol that burned his throat. He had developed a taste for it after the war. It helped him sleep without dreams. "You are correct," he said finally. "There is much more to it. Will you tell me?" The old commander was quiet for a long time. He looked around the cantina at all the different aliens drinking and laughing. Most of them had never been in a real war. They did not know what it was like to fight for your life every day. They did not know what it was like to watch your friends die. "I will tell you," he said, "but you must understand something first. What I am going to tell you will sound impossible. It will sound like the words of a crazy old soldier. But every word is true." Nexia turned on her recording device. "I am ready." Kethver closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, they were filled with old pain. 3 years ago, the Zephyrian Empire was the strongest military force in this part of the galaxy. We had conquered 47 worlds. Our ships were faster and stronger than any enemy we had faced. Our weapons were the best technology could produce. Our soldiers were trained from birth to be warriors. He paused and took another drink. Then we discovered the humans. Nexia waited for him to continue. She could see this was difficult for him. At first, we thought they would be easy to defeat. Our intelligence ships watched their worlds for months. The humans seemed primitive. They fought with simple weapons. Their ships were slow and poorly armed. They made decisions based on emotions instead of logic. Our high command expected the war to be over in a few weeks. Kethver laughed, but there was no humor in it. We were so wrong. The old commander began to tell his story. He spoke of the great Zephyrian war machine and how confident they had been. The Empire had never lost a war. They had a simple system for conquest. First, they would surround a planet with their fleet. Then they would demand surrender. Most species gave up without fighting when they saw the size of the Zephyrian force. If a species refused to surrender, the Zephyrians would attack their military bases and government buildings. They avoided killing civilians when possible. War was a game with rules. When one side could no longer fight effectively, they would surrender with honor. The winning side would accept the surrender and treat prisoners well. This was how civilized species conducted war. The first human world we approached was called New Dakota, Kethver continued. It was a farming colony with maybe 50,000 people. We sent down a surrender demand to their military commander, a human named Captain Jake Morrison. The old Zephyrian's voice became quiet. His response was 2 words. He said, "Come and take it." Nexia raised an eyebrow. That was all? That was all. We had never received such a response before. Usually, species asked for time to consider, or they tried to negotiate terms. This human just told us to come and fight. Kethver explained how confused the Zephyrian commanders had been. They decided the human must not understand the situation. They sent down a larger demand with detailed information about their fleet size and weapon capabilities. They explained that resistance was hopeless. Captain Morrison's second response was longer. He said the Zephyrians could land their ships anywhere they wanted, but they would have to take the colony over his dead body and the dead bodies of every person under his command. We thought he was bluffing, Kethver said. No rational commander would fight a battle he could not win. It made no sense. The Zephyrian High Command decided to make an example of New Dakota. They would defeat the human defenders quickly and show other human worlds what happened to those who resisted the Empire. They were about to learn their first lesson about humans. We landed our forces in the standard pattern, Kethver continued. 3 battalions in a triangle formation around their main settlement. We expected them to surrender when they saw our numbers. Instead, something strange happened. The human defenders did not retreat to defensive positions like any sensible army would do. They did not try to negotiate. Instead, they immediately began attacking the landing ships while the Zephyrian soldiers were still getting organized. It was chaos, Kethver remembered. We had never seen anything like it. The humans fought like wild animals. They showed no fear. They did not follow any logical battle plan. But that was not the strangest part. The strangest part was what happened when the Zephyrians started winning. In every other war the Empire had fought, enemy soldiers became less effective as they took casualties. When an army started losing, morale would drop. Soldiers would begin to retreat or surrender. This was natural and expected. The humans did the opposite. The more of them we killed, the harder the rest fought, Kethver said, his voice full of confusion even after all these years. When we wounded them, they became more dangerous, not less. When we surrounded them, they fought with even greater intensity. Lieutenant Lisa Brooks had been commanding a small outpost when the Zephyrians surrounded it. Any reasonable commander would have surrendered to save the lives of the soldiers under her command. Instead, she ordered her troops to fight to the last person, and they did. When the outpost finally fell, the Zephyrians found that the humans had continued fighting even after most of them were badly wounded. Some had died at their weapons, still trying to fire at the enemy. Others had used their last moments to destroy equipment so the Zephyrians could not use it. The battle for New Dakota lasted 6 days. In the end, the Zephyrians won, but the victory felt strange. They had lost 4 soldiers for every human they killed. This had never happened before in any Zephyrian conquest. The High Command told us it was unusual, Kethver finished. They said this human colony must have been defended by fanatics. They assured us that other human worlds would be more reasonable. The old commander looked at Nexia with his tired eyes. They were wrong about that too. Nexia leaned forward in her chair. The recording device captured every word as Commander Kethver continued his story. The old Zephyrian's 4 eyes seemed to look into the past, remembering things he wished he could forget. After New Dakota, we thought we understood humans, he said slowly. We thought they were just more stubborn than other species. We were wrong. We understood nothing. Kethver ordered another drink from the cantina server. His hands shook slightly as he lifted The glass. The alcohol helped, but it could not erase the memories that haunted him every night. The High Command sent us to 3 more human worlds after New Dakota. Each battle taught us something new about these creatures. Each lesson was more disturbing than the last. The second world was called New Texas. It was a mining colony with basic defenses. The Zephyrians expected an easy victory after the costly lesson of New Dakota. They were wrong again. The humans there were led by a man named Colonel Rick Stone. Kethver continued. He was different from Captain Morrison. Morrison had been a soldier. Stone was something else entirely. Colonel Stone had been a mining engineer before the war started. He knew explosives better than most military specialists. When the Zephyrians landed, they found that the entire colony had been turned into a giant trap. Every building was rigged to explode, Kethver remembered. Every road had hidden bombs. Every tunnel in the mines was ready to collapse. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what Colonel Stone did with the bodies of his dead soldiers. In Zephyrian culture, the dead were treated with great respect. Bodies were buried with ceremony. Using a dead person as a weapon was unthinkable. It was savage and barbaric. Colonel Stone had no such limits. He turned his own dead into weapons, Kethver said, his voice barely above a whisper. He would place explosive devices inside the bodies of fallen humans. When our soldiers tried to move the bodies for proper burial, they would explode. The Zephyrians had never encountered such tactics before. It was worse than fighting wild animals. Animals did not dishonor their own dead, but the humans seemed to have no limits on what they would do to win. One of my lieutenants, a young warrior named Vexta, was killed by one of these traps, Kethver continued. He was trying to give a dead human soldier a proper burial. The explosion killed him and 2 other warriors. But even this was not the most disturbing thing about Colonel Stone's tactics. The most disturbing thing was that the human soldiers agreed to it. We captured one of their wounded fighters, Kethver explained. A sergeant named Danny Clark. He was badly hurt, but he was still alive. We asked him about the explosive bodies. He smiled at us and said he had volunteered to be turned into a bomb when he died. Sergeant Clark explained that all the human soldiers on New Texas had volunteered for the same thing. They did not see it as dishonoring the dead. They saw it as a way to keep fighting, even after death. He said something I will never forget. Kethver continued. He said a good soldier fights until he dies. A great soldier fights after he dies too. The battle for New Texas lasted 2 weeks. The Zephyrians won, but at a terrible cost. They lost 6 soldiers for every human they killed. More importantly, they lost something else. They lost their confidence. My soldiers started having nightmares, Kethver said. They were afraid to touch anything on human worlds. They were afraid to help wounded enemies. They were afraid to bury the dead. The humans had turned war into something unrecognizable. The third world was New Vermont. It was defended by Major Kate Hudson and her small force of soldiers. This time, the Zephyrians tried a different approach. They decided to avoid the human defenders and attack civilian targets to force a surrender. This was another mistake. Major Hudson did not try to protect the civilians by keeping us away from them, Kethver explained. Instead, she moved her soldiers into the civilian areas. She turned every house into a fortress. She turned every school into a military base. The Zephyrians found themselves fighting in streets full of non-combatants. According to the rules of civilized warfare, they should have withdrawn to avoid civilian casualties. But Major Hudson gave them no choice. She used the civilians as shields, Kethver said. But it was worse than that. The civilians wanted to be shields. The human civilians on New Vermont did not flee from the battle. They did not try to stay neutral. Instead, they joined the fight. Children as young as 10 years old were carrying ammunition to the soldiers, Kethver remembered. Old people were making bombs in their kitchens. Doctors were treating wounded fighters and then picking up weapons to fight themselves. The most shocking moment came when a Zephyrian squad entered a human school. They expected to find children and teachers hiding in fear. Instead, they found a classroom full of 8-year-old humans learning how to clean weapons and make explosives. The teacher was a woman named Amy Rodriguez, Cuthbert said. She was showing the children how to make bombs from common household items. When she saw our soldiers, she did not surrender. She did not try to protect the children by giving up. Amy Rodriguez grabbed a weapon and started shooting at the Zephyrian soldiers. The children did not run or hide. They helped her reload and brought her more ammunition. We had to retreat from a school, Cuthbert said with disbelief in his voice. Trained Zephyrian warriors defeated by a teacher and her students. The battle for New Vermont became a nightmare of urban warfare. Every building was a fortress. Every civilian was a potential enemy. The Zephyrians could not tell who was a soldier and who was not, because the humans did not make that distinction. On the 5th day of fighting, we cornered a group of human defenders in a hospital. Cuthbert continued. They were out of ammunition and surrounded. Any reasonable force would have surrendered. Instead, the humans did something that broke the minds of the Zephyrian soldiers. They started singing, Cuthbert said quietly. As we prepared to capture them, they began to sing some kind of battle song. It was loud and defiant. They sang as if they had already won. The song was called the Battle Hymn of the Republic. The humans sang it as they prepared to make their final stand. But they were not preparing to surrender or die quietly. They were preparing for one last attack. They charged us while singing, Cuthbert remembered. They had no weapons left, so they used their bare hands. They fought like demons. Some of my soldiers broke and ran. They could not understand enemies who sang while they died. The leader of that final charge was a young private named Ben Taylor. He had been wounded in the leg and could barely walk. But when the other humans began their charge, he stood up and limped forward with them. Private Taylor was the last one alive, Cuthbert said. He was surrounded by the bodies of his friends. He was bleeding from multiple wounds. We called for him to surrender. Ben Taylor looked at the Zephyrian soldiers surrounding him. He was barely able to stand. His weapon was empty. He had no chance of winning. He smiled at us, Cuthbert continued. Then he pulled out a grenade and held it up so we could see it. He said, "See you in hell, boys." Then he pulled the pin. The explosion killed Ben Taylor and 12 Zephyrian warriors. It also killed something else. It killed the Zephyrian belief that war had rules. After New Vermont, my soldiers started having what our doctors called human syndrome, Cuthbert explained. They could not sleep. They jumped at sudden noises. They were afraid to fight enemies who did not fear death. The Zephyrian High Command decided to send their best troops to the next human world. They chose the most experienced warriors and the most advanced weapons. They were determined to win a quick, clean victory to restore their army's confidence. Next world was New Oregon. It was defended by Commander Alex Mitchell and his small fleet of human ships. We thought space combat would be different, Cuthbert said. We thought the humans could not use their crazy tactics in ship-to-ship fighting. We were wrong about that too. Commander Mitchell's ships were old and slow compared to Zephyrian vessels. His weapons were less advanced. His fleet was outnumbered 3-1. By every logical measure, he should have retreated or surrendered. Instead, he did something that no Zephyrian commander had ever seen before. He ordered his ships to ram us, Cuthbert said with wonder in his voice. Not as a last resort. Not when they were about to be destroyed. It was his opening move. The human ships accelerated to maximum speed and aimed directly at the Zephyrian vessels. The Zephyrians thought it was a bluff. No sane commander would sacrifice his own ships like that. Commander Mitchell's ship was the first to impact, Cuthbert continued. He aimed for our flagship. His last transmission was laughter. He was laughing as he died. The battle for New Oregon lasted only 3 hours. The humans lost every ship, but they took most of the Zephyrian fleet with them. The survivors were rescued by other human vessels that arrived later. We won the battle, Kethver said. But we lost something more important. We lost our understanding of what war was supposed to be. The old commander finished his drink and stared at the table. Nexia could see the pain in his eyes. That was when we realized we were not fighting soldiers, he said softly. We were fighting something else. Something that did not follow any rules we understood. Nexia turned off the recording device for a moment. Commander, do you need to rest? Nexia ordered drinks for both of them. The cantina was getting busier as the evening went on, but their corner booth remained private. Commander Kethver sat quietly, gathering his thoughts before continuing his terrible story. After New Oregon, the High Command was angry, he said finally. They blamed local commanders for the heavy losses. They said we were fighting the humans wrong. They decided to expand the war to 12 human worlds at once. The old Zephyrian laughed bitterly. They thought that fighting more humans would somehow make it easier. The expanded war brought new horrors. Each human world had its own way of fighting. Each one taught the Zephyrians something new about human nature, and each lesson was worse than the last. The fourth world we attacked was called New California, Kethver continued. It was defended by General Patricia Stone. She was the sister of Colonel Rick Stone from New Texas. General Stone had learned from her brother's tactics, but she added her own improvements. Where Rick Stone had used explosive bodies, Patricia Stone used living bombs. She convinced her soldiers to carry bombs inside their own bodies, Kethvar said slowly. They had surgery to hide explosives inside themselves. Then they would pretend to surrender. The Zephyrians would capture these fake prisoners and bring them to secure areas for questioning. Then the humans would detonate the bombs inside their bodies. A sergeant named Kevin Harris killed 37 of my soldiers this way, Kethver remembered. He pretended to be wounded and captured. We brought him to our medical facility to treat his injuries. While our doctors were working on him, he activated the bomb inside his chest. But the living bombs were not the worst part of New California. The worst part was the children. General Stone trained children to be soldiers, Kethver said, not just to carry ammunition or make supplies. She taught them to fight and kill. The Zephyrians found squads of human children attacking their positions. Some were as young as 8 years old. They carried weapons and fought with the same intensity as adult soldiers. We could not bring ourselves to shoot children, Kethver explained. It went against everything we believed. But the children had no trouble shooting us. One incident haunted Kethver more than any other. A 10-year-old girl named Sophie Miller had approached a Zephyrian checkpoint carrying a stuffed animal. The soldiers thought she was a lost civilian child. She was not lost, Kethver said quietly. The stuffed animal was full of explosives. She walked up to my soldiers, smiled at them, and pulled a string. The explosion killed her and 5 of my warriors. The battle for New California lasted 3 weeks. The Zephyrians won, but the victory felt hollow. They had been forced to fight children. They had been forced to kill civilians who looked innocent but carried hidden weapons. My soldiers started refusing orders, Kethver continued. They would not search human buildings. They would not help human prisoners. They were afraid of everything. The fifth world was New Alaska. It was a cold planet with only one small city. The humans there were led by Captain Steve Johnson. He used the harsh weather as a weapon. Captain Johnson evacuated all the civilians from the city, Kethver explained. Then he destroyed all the heating systems and food supplies. He wanted U.S. to freeze to death. The Zephyrians were not prepared for the extreme cold. Their equipment failed in the low temperatures. Their soldiers suffered from frostbite and hypothermia. But Captain Johnson did not just hide and wait for us to freeze, Cuthbert continued. He and his soldiers attacked us every night. They knew the terrain better than we did. They moved through the snow like ghosts. The human soldiers on New Alaska wore white clothing that made them invisible in the snow. They would appear suddenly, attack a Zephyrian position, and disappear again before reinforcements could arrive. We never saw them coming, Cuthbert remembered. They would kill half a squad and vanish into the snow. My soldiers started seeing enemies everywhere. They shot at shadows and empty air. The worst attack came on the 15th night. A human soldier named Lieutenant Paul Davis led a raid on the main Zephyrian camp. He and 12 other humans killed over 100 Zephyrian warriors before disappearing back into the blizzard. Lieutenant Davis left a message written in the snow, Cuthbert said. It said, "Welcome to Alaska. Enjoy your stay." He was mocking us. The Zephyrians eventually captured the city, but it was empty. The humans had destroyed everything useful and retreated to the wilderness. The Zephyrians controlled nothing but frozen ruins. The sixth world was New Florida. This was where Cuthbert learned that humans could be even more creative with their violence. New Florida was defended by Dr. Helen Carter, he said. She was not a soldier. She was a scientist. That made her more dangerous than any general. Dr. Carter was a specialist in alien biology. She had studied Zephyrian physiology and found their weaknesses. Then she created weapons specifically designed to kill Zephyrians. She made diseases that only affected our species, Cuthbert explained. She released them into the air and water. My soldiers started getting sick within days of landing. The diseases were horrible. They caused fever, blindness, and painful death. Worst of all, they spread quickly through the Zephyrian forces. We had to wear protective suits just to breathe, Cuthbert continued, but the suits were heavy and hard to move in. The human soldiers could run and fight normally while we stumbled around like drunks. Dr. Carter also created biological weapons from the local wildlife. She modified insects to inject poison when they bit Zephyrian skin. She altered plants to release toxic gases when touched. The entire planet became a weapon, Cuthbert said. Every animal, every plant, every breath of air was trying to kill us. The Zephyrians eventually captured Dr. Carter after a month of fighting. She was found in her laboratory, still working on new weapons, even as the city fell around her. When we arrested her, she was smiling, Cuthbert remembered. She said she had already released 17 different biological agents across the star system. She told us we would all be dead within a year. Dr. Carter was wrong about the timeline, but not about the result. Many of the Zephyrian soldiers who fought on New Florida died from her diseases months after the battle ended. She killed more of my soldiers after the war than during it, Cuthbert said bitterly. The seventh world was New Maine. It was a fishing colony with a small population. The Zephyrians expected an easy victory. They were wrong again. The humans there were led by Admiral Nancy Brooks, Cuthbert continued. She was the mother of Lieutenant Lisa Brooks, who died defending New Dakota. Admiral Brooks had spent months preparing for the Zephyrian attack. She had turned the entire ocean into a battlefield. She sank her own ships to create underwater obstacles, Cuthbert explained. She placed mines in the harbors. She trained dolphins to attack our landing craft. The Zephyrians had never fought a naval battle against humans before. They learned quickly that humans were just as dangerous on water as they were on land. Admiral Brooks had submarines hiding underwater, Cuthbert continued. They would surface suddenly, attack our ships, and disappear again. We never knew where they would strike next. The most shocking attack came when a human submarine surfaced directly underneath a Zephyrian cruiser. The submarine captain, a man named Commander Tony Lopez, had loaded his vessel with explosives. He turned his submarine into a giant bomb, Cuthbert said. The explosion sank his submarine and our cruiser. Commander Lopez killed himself and 300 of my warriors, but Admiral Brooks saved the worst surprise for last. On the final day of the battle, she activated something she called the Kraken, Kethver continued. It was a giant sea creature that she had been training for months. The creature was a massive squid that had been modified with cybernetic implants. Admiral Brooks could control it remotely. She used it to attack the remaining Zephyrian ships. The beast destroyed 4 of our vessels before we could kill it, Kethver remembered. But even dying, it tried to drag our ships underwater with its tentacles. The battle for New Maine lasted only 2 weeks, but it cost the Zephyrians an entire fleet. They controlled the planet, but they had no ships left to defend it. After New Maine, the High Command started talking about ending the war, Kethver said. But the politicians would not allow it. They said the Empire could not show weakness. The 8th World was New Georgia. It was defended by Colonel Maria Gonzalez and her regiment of soldiers. She introduced the Zephyrians to a new type of human warfare, psychological torture. Colonel Gonzalez did not just try to kill us, Kethver explained. She tried to drive us insane. The human soldiers on New Georgia used sound as a weapon. They played loud, disturbing noises through speakers hidden around the battlefield. The sounds never stopped, day or night. They played recordings of dying Zephyrians, Kethver sighed. They played our own voices calling for help. They played human laughter mixed with screams of pain. The constant noise made it impossible for the Zephyrian soldiers to sleep or concentrate. They began making mistakes. They started seeing things that were not there. Some of my warriors went completely mad, Kethver continued. They would attack their own comrades, thinking they were human soldiers. Others would just sit and stare at nothing, not responding to orders. Colonel Gonzalez also used light as a weapon. She had powerful. The cantina had grown quiet around them. Other customers spoke in hushed voices, as if they could sense the weight of the story being told in the corner booth. Commander Kethver ordered his strongest drink. His 4 eyes were distant, lost in memories of the worst battle of his life. New Earth was different from the other human worlds, he began slowly. It was their fortress planet, the most heavily defended world in human space. The High Command sent General Vexmore to lead the attack. He was our greatest military mind. Nexia waited patiently as the old Zephyrian gathered his thoughts. She could see this part of the story was the most difficult for him to tell. General Vexmore brought the largest fleet in Zephyrian history, Kethver continued. 5,000 ships, 2 million soldiers, the best weapons our empire could build. He was confident we would crush the humans quickly. The human defenses were commanded by General Chris Parker. Intelligence reports said he was a veteran of many human wars, but nothing in his record prepared the Zephyrians for what they would face. The first sign that something was wrong came when we entered the system, Kethver remembered. General Parker sent us a message. It was not a surrender demand or a negotiation request. It was a song. The message was a recording of human voices singing. The song was called "We Shall Overcome." Thousands of human voices sang together in harmony. At the end, General Parker's voice came on alone. He said, "Welcome to New Earth. This is where your empire dies. This is where we show you what humans really are," Kethver recalled. Then he laughed and cut the transmission. General Vexmore ordered an immediate attack. The Zephyrian fleet moved toward the planet, expecting to crush the human defenses. Within hours, we learned our first lesson before we even reached orbit, Kethver said. The humans had turned their own moons into weapons. The moons around New Earth had been hollowed out and filled with explosives. When the Zephyrian fleet came within range, the humans detonated them. The explosions created clouds of deadly debris that destroyed hundreds of ships. General Vexmore lost a quarter of his fleet before firing a single shot. Kethver continued. But that was just the beginning. The space battle around New Earth lasted for 3 days. The humans fought with the same intensity they had shown on every other world, but here they had better weapons and more soldiers. Their ships were still inferior to ours, Kethver explained, but they used them like battering rams. Every human. Captain seemed willing to die to take one of our ships with them. The most shocking moment came when a damaged human cruiser, commanded by Captain Brian Miller, aimed directly at General Vexmore's flagship. The ship was already exploding, but Captain Miller kept it on course. Captain Miller's final words were, "Broadcasted on all frequencies," Kethver remembered. He said, "For every human child who will never see the stars because of you, I send you to hell." Then his ship hit the flagship. General Vexmore survived, but barely. His command ship was crippled. The Zephyrian fleet was in chaos. And the humans had not even used their main defenses yet. When we finally reached the planet, we discovered what General Parker had been preparing. Kethver continued. He had turned the entire world into a fortress. Every city on New Earth had been fortified. Every building was a bunker. Every street was a kill zone. The humans had spent years preparing for this battle. But the fortifications were not the worst part, Kethver said quietly. The worst part was the people inside them. General Parker had not just prepared buildings for war. He had prepared the entire population. Every human on New Earth, from children to the elderly, was ready to fight. We landed our forces expecting to fight soldiers, Kethver explained. Instead, we found ourselves fighting an entire civilization. The first landing zone was near a human school. The Zephyrian soldiers expected to secure the area quickly and use the school as a command post. The school was full of children, Kethver remembered, but these children were not hiding or crying. They were armed and ready to fight. The children, some as young as 6 years old, had been trained in basic combat. They knew how to use weapons, make bombs, and set traps. More importantly, they were not afraid. A 7-year-old girl named Emma Davis shot 3 of my soldiers before we could stop her, Kethver said. When we captured her, she spit in my face and called me a monster. The teachers were even worse than the students. They coordinated the children's attacks and provided covering fire. The school principal, a woman named Mrs. Janet Collins, detonated the building rather than let the Zephyrians use it. She killed herself, 50 children, and 20 of my warriors, Kethver continued. As the building collapsed, we could hear the children singing their school song. The battle moved into the city streets. Every block was a nightmare of urban warfare. The humans fought from every window, every rooftop, every doorway. The civilians were worse than the soldiers, Kethver explained. At least soldiers followed some rules. The civilians had no rules at all. An elderly man named George Wilson used his wheelchair to carry bombs. He would roll up to Zephyrian positions, smile like a friendly grandfather, and detonate the explosives hidden under his blanket. He killed dozens of my soldiers, Kethver remembered. When we finally stopped him, we found he had been doing it for weeks. He kept a diary of every Zephyrian he killed. A group of human mothers, led by a woman named Linda Hayes, turned a daycare center into a weapons factory. They made bombs while their babies played nearby. When the Zephyrians found them, the mothers used their own children as human shields. They held their babies while shooting at us, Kethver said, his voice breaking. They knew we would not fire back. They used our mercy against us. But the moment that broke Kethver's mind came in Sector 7. His battalion was advancing through a residential area when they encountered a group of wounded human soldiers. The humans were trapped in a building that was on fire, he explained. They were out of ammunition and surrounded. Their sergeant, a woman named Maria Lopez, was badly wounded. Sergeant Lopez had been shot in the stomach and leg. She was bleeding heavily and could barely stand. Her squad was dead or dying around her. Any rational soldier would have surrendered. Instead, she smiled at us, Kethver continued. She was holding something in her hand, a small device with a red button. The device was connected to the power grid for the entire sector. Sergeant Lopez had rigged the electrical system to overload. If she pressed the button, the explosion would destroy everything within a mile radius. She told us to come closer, Kethver remembered. She said she wanted to look us in the eyes when she killed us all. Most of Kethver's soldiers retreated, but he stayed. He tried to talk to Sergeant Lopez, to convince her to surrender. He told her the war was pointless. He told her she could live if she gave up. She laughed at me, Kethver said. She said, the war was not pointless to her. She said every dead Zephyrian was one less monster who could hurt human children. Then Sergeant Lopez pressed the button. The explosion killed 300 of my soldiers, Kethver continued. It destroyed half the sector. It left me as the only survivor of my battalion. But Sergeant Lopez had not died in the explosion. The blast had thrown her clear of the building, though she was even more badly wounded than before. I found her. In the rubble, Kethver said quietly. She was dying. Blood was pouring from dozens of wounds. She could not move. Kethver had been wounded too. His armor was cracked, and he was bleeding from several cuts. He was dying just as surely as the human sergeant. I expected her to try to kill me with her last breath, he continued. Instead, she did something that changed everything. Sergeant Lopez looked at Kethver's wounds and saw how badly he was hurt. Without saying a word, she reached into her medical kit and pulled out bandages and medicine. She treated my wounds, Kethver said, wonder in his voice. The same person who had just killed 300 of my soldiers was saving my life. Sergeant Lopez worked slowly and carefully, using her medical supplies to stop Kethver's bleeding. She could barely move, but she kept working until his wounds were bandaged. When she was finished, she asked me if I had family back home, Kethver continued. I told her about my wife and children. She smiled and said she hoped I would see them again. Then Sergeant Lopez did something even more shocking. She stayed with Kethver until Zephyrian rescue teams arrived. She talked to him about her own family, her dreams, her hopes for the future. She told me about her daughter, Kethver remembered, a little girl named Rosa who wanted to be a teacher. Lopez said she was fighting so Rosa could grow up in a free world. When the Zephyrian medics arrived, they found the two enemies sitting together in the ruins. Sergeant Lopez was holding Kethver's hand, comforting him as he cried for his dead soldiers. She died an hour later, Kethver said softly. Her last words were, "Take care of yourself, soldier." War is hell for everyone. The rescue of Kethver was the last successful operation on New Earth. General Vexmore had lost most of his fleet and half his army. The remaining Zephyrian forces were trapped on the planet, fighting a population that would rather die than surrender. 3 days later, General Vexmore ordered a full retreat, Kethver continued. It was the first time in Zephyrian history that we had been defeated by an inferior enemy. The cantina was nearly empty now. Only a few late-night drinkers remained at the bar, speaking in quiet voices. Commander Kethver and Nexia sat in their corner booth, surrounded by empty glasses and the weight of an unfinished story. That was 3 years ago, Kethver said slowly. The official end of the human war, but the real end came much earlier, in that ruined building with Sergeant Lopez. Nexia checked her recording device. It was still running, capturing every word of the old warrior's confession. She knew this story would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. The retreat from New Earth was chaos, Kethver continued. Half our ships were destroyed. Most of our soldiers were dead, wounded, or insane. Those who survived could not stop talking about the humans. The story spread quickly through the Zephyrian Empire. Soldiers told their families about enemies who fought after death. children who carried bombs, and civilians who sang while they died. The tales grew with each telling, but the core truth remained the same. The humans were not like other species. Kethver explained. They did not follow the rules. They did not know when to quit. They treated every battle like the end of the world. The Zephyrian High Command tried to suppress the stories. They declared the war records classified. They forbade soldiers from discussing their experiences. They claimed the retreat was a strategic decision based on economics, not military failure. But you cannot hide the truth from families who lost their sons, Kethver said bitterly. You cannot lie to mothers who watched their children come home broken and afraid. The real impact of the human war was not on battlefields, but in the hearts and minds of the Zephyrian people. Young warriors who had dreamed of military glory now feared being sent to fight humans. Recruitment for the army dropped to almost nothing. Parents would rather see their children become farmers or merchants than soldiers, Kethver explained. They had heard too many stories about what humans did to warriors. The Zephyrian military began studying human history to understand their enemy better. What they found terrified them more than any battlefield experience. We discovered that humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years, Kethver said. They had perfected the art of war through constant practice. Every human child grew up learning about famous battles and great warriors. Human history was filled with wars that made the Zephyrian conflicts look like children's games. Humans had fought with swords, guns, bombs, and poison gas. They had killed millions of their own species and called it progress. We found records of human battles where entire cities were destroyed, Kethver continued. Wars where humans killed each other for years without stopping. Conflicts where they would rather die than surrender. The most disturbing discovery was how humans viewed warfare itself. Most species saw war as a tool for achieving political goals. When the cost became too high, they would negotiate and find peaceful solutions. Humans see war differently, Kethver explained. For them, war is not just politics, it is survival. It is about who deserves to exist and who does not. This explained why human soldiers fought so desperately. They were not just fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for the right of their species to continue existing. Every human battle is a fight to the death, Kethver said. Not because they want to die, but because they believe their enemy wants to destroy everything they love. The Zephyrian analysts made another shocking discovery. Humans did not just fight external enemies with such intensity. They fought each other the same way. We found records of human civil wars that lasted for decades, Kethver continued. Brother fighting brother with the same hatred they showed us. Father killing son over political differences. This explained why humans were so good at war. They had been practicing on each other for their entire history. Every generation of humans learned warfare from the generation before them. Human children play war games, Kethver said with wonder. They pretend to be soldiers and practice killing each other for fun. What other species teaches its young to be warriors? The Zephyrian Empire tried to prepare for future conflicts with humans by changing their military training. They attempted to teach their soldiers to think like humans, to fight without mercy or rules. It was a disaster, Kethver remembered. Our warriors could not adapt to human tactics. The ideas were too foreign to our nature. Zephyrian culture emphasized honor, duty, and respect for life. These values made them excellent soldiers in traditional warfare. But they were weaknesses when fighting humans. We could not teach our children to be killers, Kethver explained. We could not train our soldiers to ignore surrender. We could not make our people believe that death was better than defeat. More importantly, the Zephyrian people did not want to become like humans. The idea of turning their civilization into a warrior culture was horrifying to them. We realized that to beat humans, we would have to become humans, Kethver said. and none of us wanted that. The final decision to avoid human space came from an unexpected source. Kethver himself had been asked to write a report about human military capabilities for the High Command. I told them the truth, he said simply. I told them that humans do not have soldiers. Humans are soldiers. The report explained that every human civilian was a potential warrior. Every human child was learning to fight. Every human adult had the capacity for violence that shocked other species. I wrote that humans do not fight wars, Kethver continued. Wars fight humans. And wars always lose because humans refuse to accept defeat. The report had one more disturbing conclusion. Humans were not just dangerous because of their military skills. They were dangerous because they were expanding into space. We had found one small part of human civilization, Kethver explained. The colonies we attacked were frontier settlements with basic weapons and simple defenses. But behind them was something much larger. Intelligence reports showed that humans controlled hundreds of worlds. Their population was growing rapidly. Their technology was advancing quickly. Most importantly, they were actively exploring and colonizing new star systems. We had fought the weakest humans and barely survived, Kethver said. What would happen when we met their core worlds? What would happen when we faced their real military? The Zephyrian High Command made a secret decision. They declared human space off-limits to all Empire ships. They instructed their diplomats to avoid contact with human governments. They quietly withdrew all forces from the border regions. We built a buffer zone around human territory, Kethver explained. Empty systems that neither side could enter. We hoped that would keep us safe. But the buffer zone was not enough to ease Zephyrian fears. Reports continued to arrive about human expansion. New colonies were being established. Human ships were exploring farther into space. Every year, humans control more territory, Kethver said. Every year, they grow stronger. Every year, they get closer to other species. The Zephyrian Empire began sharing their information about humans with other galactic civilizations. They warned anyone who would listen about the dangers of human contact. Most species did not believe us, Kethver continued. They thought we were exaggerating. They thought we were making excuses for our defeat. But some species listened. The Krolites had encountered human exploration ships and confirmed the Zephyrian reports. The Ventari had intercepted human communications and been disturbed by their content. We formed an informal alliance, Kethver explained. Not for conquest or trade, but for mutual protection. We share information about human movements. We warn each other when humans approach our territories. The alliance had a simple goal: avoid humans at all costs. We call it the non-contact protocol, Kethver said. If any of our ships encounter humans, they are ordered to retreat immediately. No communication, no negotiation, just run. This was why Kethver had agreed to give this interview. He wanted the galaxy to understand what was coming. Humans are expanding, he said urgently. They are building more ships, establishing more colonies, exploring more systems. Eventually, they will encounter other species. When that happened, Kethver believed the results would be catastrophic. Other species will try to fight them, he predicted. They will think humans are just another primitive race that can be easily conquered. They will learn the same lessons we learned, but it will be too late. The old commander leaned forward, his 4 eyes intense with conviction. I break my silence because someone needs to warn the galaxy, he said. Humans are not just another species. They are something new. Something that changes everything. Kethver believed that humanity represented a fundamental shift in galactic civilization. For thousands of years, advanced species had followed similar patterns of development. They became peaceful, rational, and diplomatic as they evolved. Humans evolved differently, he explained. They became more dangerous as they became more advanced. They learned to kill more efficiently while developing faster ships and better weapons. The combination was unprecedented in galactic history. We are facing a species that has the technology of a Type II civilization and the warrior instincts of primitive savages, Kethver said. They build starships and think like barbarians. Nexia turned off her recording device. The interview was complete, but she had one final question.